Hello viewers, welcome back to the Talking Shop channel. We're back at the forklift again. We're back in the shop. We got the furnace going. We're going to get some wiring done today. So what do we got going on? Well, first of all, the gauge has arrived. Boom, there we go. Autometer, not a sponsor. I bought these gauges myself, but I have used them before and lots of other things. They are a professional instrument. They're not the $15 water temp gauge you buy at your auto parts store. These are actually competition instruments, but I'm real happy with the way they work, so that's what I went with. You pay a little bit more for them, but you get a quality gauge that you can trust the readings. So before we go any farther with that, I got them in the panel, but before we go any farther with that, we're going to come back over here, and we are going to wire in our little fuse panel that we talked about on an earlier episode. That's going to go in there like that. I got to drill a couple holes. And whoops, I was going to mount our relay, but I think I may just let that droop down in the bottom of the battery box. I don't see any reason to mount that. I mean, I could come in here and go down there, but you wouldn't access it with the battery in there anyway. So I think we're just going to wire that in and let it dangle down in there. But before we get started, that's going to be the first thing. We're going to get the fuse going, or the fuse panel in there. And then we will we got to run a couple wires from our relay to feed our fuse panel, and then we're going to have to run a couple wires out of the battery box. There's going to be some wires coming in the battery box. I'm going to have to drill another hole to run some wiring through. So we're going to get that job done, and then we'll continue on with the wiring. That's not going to work. Hopefully that made a mark. Yeah, it kind of did, yeah. Well, I can make a paper, one out of paper too. Let's do that. So I just made a paper template out of, it's actually out of the lid to one of the gauges. So if we just went like that, scooch over a little more. All right, we're marked off. I will get a drill bit and we'll get the drilling. Okay, evidently that bit's nice and dull. Okay guys, we got our holes drilled, we got our fuse panel mounted, but I just want to explain before we go to wire in how we're going to work this relay and what a relay is. So basically a relay is a switch, and it allows us to control a large amount of current with a very little current. So there's our wiring diagram. I don't know how well that's going to show up on camera, but what's going to happen is right now terminals 3 and 4 are closed. This is 3 and this is 4. This down here is a pulling coil. It's a little magnet. Now this requires very little current to work, and that's on terminals 1 and 2. So when we turn our key switch on, the accessory terminal on the switch is going to send power into 2, and then it's going to operate this magnet. Number 1 is just going to go to ground. When that happens, it's going to pull this switch closed, and it's going to connect terminals 3 and 5. Now terminals 3 and 5 can carry a large amount of current, so we will come probably from the load terminal on the voltage regulator and feed terminal 3, and we'll come out of terminal 5 and go to our fuse panel, and that'll power our fuse panel. So when we turn the key on, current goes into 2, it comes out of 2 and goes to 1, which goes to ground. That operates that magnet. That magnet's going to close this switch and allow current to go from the load terminal on the battery to our fuse panel. I suppose I could go from the load terminal directly to the fuse panel, but this allows me to control it with the ignition switch. So when we roll with, or when we install this relay, that's what we're going, and that's what we're going to do next. I'm going to ground it right on one of the mounting bolts for the battery box. Alright guys, we got our relay in. You can see it down there in the bottom of the box. So I got my wire ran up to the dash, so when we turn the ignition switch on, the accessory terminal will go ahead and power the pull-in coil, and the relay will close, and that will connect this terminal here, which I decided I'm going to go right to the battery. There's no sense of reinventing the wheel. The battery is right here. So it'll connect the battery to this terminal right here on our little fuse panel, and we'll be able to feed our gauges off of one, our strobe light off of one, and our backup alarm off the other. So that's that. I'm going to run the wires for those, and then we should be set to go. Alright gang, we got everything routed, wired in. Next step is going to be starting to loom some stuff up. I went ahead and I labeled everything up here because we're going to start looming some stuff up. I left all these wires up here long. So I want to get everything tucked away where it's supposed to be. So if I need any slack, I can pull the slack. This one I left really long. But yeah, so the next step is going to be looming. I've already started over here. This is for the backup alarm. And that is located on the hood, so we're not going to be able to hook that up till very last. But I did get it in loom, and I got it kind of tucked away. But we're going to start over here. We're going to get all these wires and everything tucked away in split loom. And then once we get that done and we get everything tied up into the frame, then we can go on to the next step, which is getting some oil and antifreeze in it, get the radiator back in. We'll finally see if this thing's going to run. Whoop. So we need yellow, red, and brown, which we have. Good. Best way to cut this stuff that I found is with a cable cutter. Alright, now we need blue and white. These are going down to the starter. And I'm just going to cut a piece off because I'm going to have to go underneath. Leave it a little long. But before I do, let's get some corner. All right, I'm going to go underneath and get that one done, gang.
this one is.
Okay guys, so I got everything loomed up. You can see when we come up into the dash panel here. And like I said, these wires are ran long. Some of them are way long, some of them are a little short. That's bad on my part. But of course we got a little bit of loom left too. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set the dash panel up in there. And we're going to get to wiring up these gauges in that ignition switch. Two heavy ones are going to be the ammeter. Oh, we got to make up a little one too because we got to jump off of the oil pressure. So I got to make up a little jumper to get battery power. So Okay guys, ran into a little snag with the ignition switch. So what's happening is when I got the ignition switch in and tightened up, this gauge is hitting it and the panel won't go down all the way. So we're gonna have to move it. Now we're gonna have to somehow maybe figure out a way to plug this hole. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna position the switch on the inside and get this back out of the way like that. We'll position the switch as farthest back and as farthest down as we can. I'll mark it with a pen. We'll come in, we'll drill a small pilot hole, and then I'll come from the outside and we'll drill a bigger hole, enough to whatever size this is. I gotta measure it and figure out what size hole we need. But yeah, and then we'll just have to relocate that switch, and then I'll somehow have to, maybe I can find a grommet or something and plug that off. But so that's the next step. Okay guys, we had a little bit of snafu with the ignition switch. The original plan did not turn out as I wanted. So there's the extra hole we drilled. This is where it was originally. This is the extra hole we did, which would have worked. I had the switch in there. It had clearance for the panel to go down. Everything was good. The problem is this is drilled on this curve. And when you put the switch in from the back side, you couldn't tighten the nut tight enough because you didn't have full contact because of that curve. So you couldn't draw the switch in tight enough to keep it from not spinning in the hole. So we had to go to plan B. Plan B is hole on the other side. There we go. Now, it works backwards to me, because to me, you should go like this to start it, but now you have to go like this, which, whatever, it is what it is. Still works. For what it's going to do, it's going to be fine. So now, I'm going to hook up the throttle and make sure everything is good there. I'm going to check the oil in the transmission. I'm going to check the oil in the rear end. I've already given it a grease job, so that part of it's done. So we're going to check the fluids in the transmission, in the rear end, and hook up the throttle. And when that is done, I can go ahead and put the floor back on. Once the floor is back on, we'll bump back here to the motor, and we will start getting some of this stuff back together. All right, gang, we got all the little stuff done. Radiator's back in, coolant's in, oil's in, power steering fluid's topped off, got the broken spark plug changed out, fuel filter hooked up, new fuel filter, throttle hooked up. We're going to see if it's going to start. It's going to take it a little bit because the fuel system's been dry for months, so it's going to take that pump a little bit to get her back primed and get gas in the carburetor again, but we'll see what happens. Sounds like we're going to charge the battery. All right, gang, battery is obviously low. I'm going to put the charger on it. We're not going to try and crowd it any. I'm going to go ahead and put the charger on it, and we'll get her back up to snuff, and probably just leave it sit overnight on a trickle charge, and we'll come back to it tomorrow. And we'll see if she's going to start. All right, we're going to give the starter a break for a sec. We got some fuel coming up in the filter, so that's a good sign. So I'm going to give the starter a break, and we'll try her again here in a second. All right, guys, we got gas dripping right out of the carburetor, so evidently we got something set wrong when we did the overhaul on the carburetor. So I'm going to pull that carburetor back off and have a look-see and see what's going on with that thing. We're back, we're running. Had to go through the carb a little bit. Found an issue with the thermostat. I actually had it running before this video, guys, so I apologize. But I was running around making some adjustments, watching the temperature gauge, and it just kept getting hotter and hotter and hotter. So I finally shut it down, let it cool, took thermostat out because it was getting hot, but you could stick your finger right in the coolant in the radiator. It was ice cold, so I was like, well, thermostat stuck, easy enough. So I let it cool, drained some coolant out of it, pulled the thermostat, and whoever did the thermostat before me put it in backwards. I didn't get that on camera. I should have. I apologize. Yeah, that could very well be the reason why we had to overhaul this thing, because Lord only knows how long it ran with that thermostat in backwards and this thing overheating. So that would explain the overheating, would explain the scuffing that was in the pistons when we took it apart. So, but at any rate, we're back, we're running. Gonna let it warm up, adjust the load screw, or the idle mixture screw. Get the idle turned down a little bit so it's idling good and smooth. We seem to be in time, so I'm gonna let that go. Yeah, that's gonna be a wrap. Put the hood on, hook up the backup alarm, put the forks back on, we're stamped done on her.